Psychology. It's a word we hear all the time, right? It's in movies, it's in those common sense sayings we all know. But how much of what we think we know about it is actually true? Well, today we're going to dive in, separate the facts from the fiction, and figure out what psychology is really all about.
So, I've got to ask you directly. Think you have a good handle on what psychology is? Well, we're about to put that to the test. We're going to bust some of the biggest myths out there, and I have a feeling that at least a couple of these are going to surprise you. All right, let's start with the big puzzle. What even is psychology? But the best way to understand what something is to first get crystal clear on what it is not. Okay, this one is probably the biggest misconception of all. If you stop someone on the street and ask them, chances are they'll say, "Oh, psychology? That's the study of the mind." And you know what? For a long time, they would have been right. But for psychology to become a real science, it had to get way more specific. And here is that huge, crucial shift. See, early on, philosophers talked about the mind as this abstract thing. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't really measure it. Modern psychology said, okay, we need something we can actually observe and test. So the focus moved to things you can see, behaviors, and things you can measure, like how memory works. After all, you can't put a mind into a microscope, but you can definitely time how fast someone reacts to a stimulus. So that brings us to what I like to call the ghosts of psychology's past. The field has a really long history, and that's left us with some pretty fascinating but totally outdated ideas that still kind of haunt us today. Let's dig in. Okay, picture this. You're in one of the very first psychology labs back in the late 1800s. Back then, the #1 goal was to try and study consciousness itself, to literally map out a person's inner world of thoughts and feelings. So you had pioneers like Wilhelm Wundt using a technique called introspection, where they'd basically just ask people, hey, what are you thinking right now? The problem? It's completely subjective. My experience of the color red could be totally different from yours. So modern psychology had to go way, way broader. Sure, we still study consciousness, but it's just one tiny piece of this massive puzzle that also includes learning, motivation, and how we act in groups. Now this myth, this one goes way back, right to the very word itself. Psyche is the Greek word for soul or spirit. So you can see why it's such an easy connection for people to make. But this is where you see the sharpest line drawn in the sand. The concept of a soul is metaphysical. It's a matter of faith or theology, and it's not something you can test in a lab. Psychology, on the other hand, lives and breathes empirical evidence. It's all about research, running experiments, and collecting data. It doesn't ask what you believe, it asks, what can we prove? Okay, let's jump in our time machine and come back to the present day. Let's talk about some of the mix-ups that are still floating around out there. These are the kinds of things you probably hear all the time. I mean, come on, we've all heard this one, right? It's like the classic rule of romantic comedies. The quiet, shy person falls for the loud, life-of-the-party type. It makes for a great story. But is it actually true? Well, when psychologists decided to test this common-sense idea, the results were overwhelmingly clear. While being different can seem exciting at first, the research shows that having things in common is a much better predictor of long-term relationship success. And this is a perfect example of what psychology really does. It takes those ideas we all just assume are true and puts them under the scientific microscope. Ooh, this is a big one. So many people get these two mixed up. And it makes sense, right? They both deal with mental health, so they must be the same job, right? Nope, not at all. Let's break it down. The differences really boil down to training, focus, and methods. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They went to medical school and have an MD. Because of that, their focus is on medical treatments and they can prescribe medication. A psychologist earns a doctorate, a PhD or a PsyD, and their focus is on things like psychotherapy, behavioral interventions, and assessment. So while they often work together, they are definitely two very different professions. Ah yes, the classic TV trope. The psychologist who just looks at you, squints their eyes, and suddenly knows all of your deepest, darkest secrets. It's super dramatic for sure, but it has almost nothing to do with reality. Here's the fundamental difference. Pseudoscience, like fortune-telling, makes these absolute mystical claims about your destiny. Psychology does something totally different. It uses data to find patterns and make predictions based on probability. It can't tell you what you will do tomorrow, but based on a ton of data, it can make a pretty good guess about what someone with your personality is likely to do in a specific situation. It's all about probability, not prophecy. So if psychology isn't just about reading minds or talking philosophy, what is it? Well, that leads us to maybe the biggest myth of all, that every psychologist is a therapist with a couch in their office. Let's take a look beyond the couch. And this chart really tells the story. Now, clinical and counseling psychology, that's the therapy side of things. It's definitely the biggest slice of the pie, but look at all that other space. It's far from the whole thing. You've got psychologists working in schools, for big corporations, with athletes, in the legal system. The field is absolutely huge and incredibly diverse.
And what are they all studying? Pretty much everything about being human. They're looking at the actual wiring of your brain. They're studying how we grow and change from the day we're born to our last days. They're figuring out how we learn, why we act the way we do at work, why we choose one brand of cereal over another, and how we behave in a crowd. It touches on almost every part of our lives. Okay, we have torn down a whole bunch of myths, so now it's time to build up the real picture. Let's put all the pieces together and finally answer that big question we started with.
So here it is. This is the definition. Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Every single one of those words is critical. Scientific is what separates it from philosophy and guesswork, and behavior and mental processes are the concrete things we can actually watch and measure, not the vague mind or soul we talked about earlier.
And believe me, that word scientific is not just there for decoration. The entire field is built on this foundation. This isn't about someone's gut feeling or a cool idea they had. It's about rigorous research, careful observation, controlled experiments, and analyzing the data. At the end of the day, it's a science that is grounded in hard evidence.
So we'll leave you with a question to chew on. Now that you can see past the pop culture myths to the actual science underneath, how is that going to change the way you see the world? When you're watching yourself or the people around you, things might just start to look a little different.